Hello, this is the Mae B Mindful Podcast, and I am your host, Hannah Mae. I'm a mother of 6, conscious birth instructor and educator, spiritual growth facilitator, and certified hypnotist. This podcast is about inspiring hope, expanding awareness and consciousness in order to revolutionize the way we live and experience our lives. You can expect thought-provoking episodes, each week spanning a range of topics, drawing from both my own journey of transformation and healing and working with others. I hope you find this podcast to be informative, refreshing, illuminating, and instrumental in your own soul's evolution and growth. Let's jump right in. Hi guys, welcome back here to the Mae B Mindful Podcast. How's everybody doing? I just thought I'd talk about spirituality, like the super spiritual people of the world, and like how we grow and the opportunities and like how we get to where we want to be. And I kind of laugh at myself because even saying it sounds just so arrogant. It's like the opposite of what the spiritual experience actually requires. It requires this humbling, this recognition, this allowing. I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so you take me to a mountaintop. You drop me on a mountaintop alone. You send me to a retreat. I don't know. Whatever, just leave me alone. Like, let me watch a sunset. Let me get quiet. Let me pray. It's like my happy place, just to like meditate, to be like peace, to cultivate that peace. Cause that's the thing that like really makes me okay at the end of the day, based on my journey and like seeing the things that don't work and knowing the things that do work, like to take that time. That's a spiritual idea. Like, okay, that's sort of spiritual, right? But like you throw me back in my family at dinner time. You throw me like in a war zone, which sometimes that family dinner time can feel like a war zone. You throw me in a conflict, a highly combative situation with somebody who's being inflammatory. You throw me in a group of people that I don't know. That can also feel like a war zone. And then you get to see how spiritual you actually are. Like, how are you responding to people? How awake and conscious and aware are you? How awake to spirit are you in you? How do you respond? What tools are you able to pull from? What are you able to fall back on that you've already integrated through prior challenges as a result of probably seeing failure and needing to level up? So this process and this practice of spirituality has nothing to do with like really, I mean, it has something to do with what you practice separately, but it's how do you integrate it into life? Like, how do you find your place? How do you become right-sized in the world with your fellows? How do you do that? It makes me laugh. It's like, okay, yeah, on my own, I'm a very evolved human. I'm very conscious. I'm very aware, but nobody's pressing my buttons, okay? If I go do yoga on my porch, which I love doing, I can really get in the zone. I love yoga. I'm down in my basement or anywhere where I can just really go inward and drop into the practice and get very present with my body. That's a spiritual practice. What happens if my kids come in fighting? Do you know how many times my kids have come in like that, like distracting me, interrupting me when I'm trying to have this spiritual moment? And like, how many times have I gotten frustrated with them or yelled at them because of that? And then been like, wow, how much is this practice actually doing for me if I'm yelling at my kids right now because I'm so spiritual, right? It's not. It's like it is, but the opportunity to grow and actually be spiritual is in allowing that to be integrated into my behavior and have a different reaction. How do I have that different reaction? First of all, I have to see that I need help. Like, I obviously don't have it all in hand and I'm very attached. I'm very attached in that moment to the moment. I'm very attached in that moment to needing it to be the way I want it to be so that I can experience this consolation. And a lot of times we get into this idea and belief that spirituality is a feeling state. It is not a feeling state, okay? Yes, you can be gifted incredible consolations and peace and all these things that are like great fruits and results of living a more spiritually aligned life. But if I'm not taking the opportunities to put those into practice, then they're just pretty empty and it's just superficial and it's just talk. And it's actually selfish because It's simply for the purpose of self-gratification, right? And so, yes, my yoga practice is incredibly important to me. My meditation and prayer time is incredibly important to me. I have boundaries around that. I have learned to say, hey guys, I know, I know you really want to talk about this. I really need to give this the last 10 minutes, and then I will be able to give you my full attention. Okay, it took me a minute to get there. And then what happens if they disrespect that boundary? Or better yet, what happens if it's not something that can wait and you are called to duty or called to action and you have to leave your sacred space that you're wanting to derive something from and go be of service? I mean, isn't service, I'd say service is a pretty spiritual action, right? There's selflessness in that. That's pretty spiritual. There's a refining in that. There's refining in that challenge, in that death of self. There's death of self in that because I really wanted this. I really wanted it to look like this. I really was trying to get this for myself. It wasn't possible in that moment. So I had to be willing to give that up temporarily in order to grow. And so it's like, whatever it is you're wanting, whatever it is you're wanting, you're wanting to grow. Okay, how do you grow? How do you do that? It's not like ordering something out of the vending machine. It's not like I like a Snickers and you press A4, you put your change in and you get your Snickers. I don't know, I might have done that in the wrong order. I haven't ordered anything out of a vending machine in a really long time, but it's not quite that simple. It's not quite that clearly laid out. It's like, okay, if I want patience, okay, then how am I going to get patience? Does the fairy godmother come and go ding and tap me on the head with her pretty wand and then suddenly I have the gift of patience? Like, no, that is not what fucking happens in order for me to get patience. People say to me all the time, they're like, you are so patient. I'm like, you don't know. And if I do exhibit any degree of patience, it's because if I didn't, I would be a psycho because of like the amount of the need for patience is so great in my life sometimes that, and granted, I fall short with it, but the need is so great and the opportunities are so many that it's pushed me into a place where I have to try and practice patience. Otherwise, I mean, I'd probably be causing a good amount of harm to the people around me because, you know, if you're a mom, you spend your life being interrupted. Like, I, I, sometimes you can't even have, I think it's created these newer pathways where like I even have a hard time creating these episodes because I can't even finish a thought sometimes because I'm like, well, maybe I just haven't done it enough in my life because all I am is interrupted. So I don't actually know how to. That's just a conditioned response, which I joke because that's not true. I actually think that's not my issue. I have other issues. But you know, if you have a kid, here's an example, right? It's just a little thing, but you want to go somewhere. You put your little toddler in the car. So maybe they're at the point where they're like, I want to buckle myself in, and you're allowing them to explore and be independent. They want to buckle themselves in, right? Now, sometimes there's no time for this, and you're just like, no, we actually have to go, and I'm going to do this for you. You do it for them, and they break down into hysterical tears, and you have to listen to that for 10 minutes. And yeah, you got to be patient with that because they had a disappointment. But if you've ever been down the path of like, okay, there's actually no logical and sane reason for me to say, no, you can't buckle yourself in since it's, you know, it's something that brings them joy and you do have time. But oh my gosh, that can be torture. Like you really got to get present in that moment. You got to really like be having a day to really be present with that in order to appreciate that because you might have a plan. You might need to like snip, snap, move things along. And they want to sit there and like smell the roses. And how beautiful is that? But they're working on a whole different timeline. So yeah, if I have any patience, it's only because I have had plenty of opportunities to refine me. So back to if you ask for that in this example, patience, then you'll get patience. It's not just gonna be like all of a sudden like magically instilled in you, like you're just gonna be floating around on the wings of patience. Like, no, you are going to have the trials that are going to present these opportunities to build, to create, patients. And so it's kind of like this idea of, I was actually reading St. Catherine of Siena, her conversations with God, and she dictated this book because she had the stigmata. She was a Catholic mystic. She was an incredibly profoundly influential woman in papal politics at the time, in I think the 1300s or 1400s, I can't remember. I just went and visited her head, which sounds really creepy and disturbing, in Siena, Italy. And I was really excited to go find her. It was pretty deserted and desolate. People were all at the Duomo. They weren't that interested in St. Catherine's head. But I'm really into these mystics and their teachings. And I got a little more curious about her because I've always sort of peripherally really admired and been awed by her, because for a woman in her time, she was extremely influential. She was considered a doctor of the church, which was also not the norm for a female. And she was a mystic, and that's all they need to be, because I love the mystics and their depth of understanding of spirit and what they taught. And so she's one of those people. But I got a little curious. I actually had an interesting experience, like sitting there. I felt a little bit disturbed. It could have been because her mummified head was on the altar, but there was just something about her presence that really stirred me and caused me to need to seek a little deeper around certain things. And so I opened up a dialogue with her. And I love to get to know these people better, because then because they're our allies. They're souls that have been victorious and have reached a very high degree of perfection, really, of love in their life, in this life. And so I started listening to her book, her Conversations with God. But in these conversations that she has, where God the Father speaks to her, a lot of the saints were gifted with this divine communion through the Blessed Mother or through Christ. But in this case, it was God the Father. And he speaks very clearly on different subjects and things, but he speaks to her about virtue. He explains how he allows us to be tempted through love. It's through great love. And he's allowing these temptations through these trials and challenges to refine virtue and strengthen it in us. And he says, you are strong. I already made you strong. So don't consent to this challenge, to this lie, right, of the enemy to weaken you, because we are only made weak through consent. And we are strengthened through the acceptance of the challenge. And we can always consent to that. We have the ability of free will to consent to that challenge, to choose to rise to that, as difficult and as exhausting sometimes as those requests and those invitations can feel. But he says it's so that we may conquer, basically, so that we can overcome, so that we can conquer. And once you've overcome, it's like you've passed that level. You have conquered, you have strengthened yourself. And now this tool is something that you have that you know you can access because you've accessed it before. And he says also, so that you may come to a perfect knowledge of yourself and me. And so when we come to know ourselves, we come to know presence within, presence of God, or whatever you choose to call it. And so he explains that fear is not proved, but by its contrary. So we can feel overwhelmed or challenged sometimes. And if we can simply reframe it and recognize that these challenges, these events that are bringing up maybe very strong feelings of aversion or challenging those things that are contrary to what we would like to be and embodying in our life, those things are opportunities, those things are gifts. There's a little soul burn that has to happen in that moment of like, okay, I'm not going to react according to my like human natural impulse, that instinct, that lower self, like that very human response of like impatient, snappy, right? Which we all know how to do. And that muscle is very accessible to us. It is very human, but to go a little deeper and to reach into that place in us that requires a little bit of death of self, just a little death of the ego, in order to go, okay, can I let a little bit of myself go here? And it's not the part of myself that should stay. It's the part of myself that I would do better by detaching from. So it's like in that moment, that burn of like, ugh, I so want to reach for this, would be so easy right now, but I'm going to pass through this very brief, momentary, if we're willing to pass through it, feeling of like deprivation almost, because we don't get what we want in that moment. We don't get to like try and force that instant gratification or whatever. It's a purification. It's actually a moment of purification. There's a purging that happens, and that's uncomfortable. Like all this stuff's fucking uncomfortable. This is where we can accept and allow grace. And that's where the magic wand thing actually does happen in my experience. That's like where there's this supernatural inflow because we're open and receptive. The only reason that we get that is because we consent to it. So that's incredible. We consent to it. Therefore, the space is open. Why is the space open? The space is open because we were willing to like, let go of trying to wield this other weapon that was not effective. It was keeping the space full. And when we move it out and we let go and we go, okay, as difficult as it may feel sometimes, then we allow the space for something new to come in. And this applies to all kinds of attachments, which is a really incredible formula to start to go, okay, if I can let this go, this thing that's causing me harm or causing the situation harm or just not in alignment with who I want to be. So whether it's an action, it's most likely an action or an attachment to something. Like say if I am doing something that's unhealthy for me, I'm putting something in my body that's causing me to be unhealthy physically and mentally and emotionally. If I'm willing to let go of that as a solution, then I free up the space and I can accept a new solution. I can become free from that attachment. So there's a death that has to happen. There's a severing of an attachment that has to happen there. And it's a whole nother talk on attachments, but the attachments are really the things that keep us in bondage and unhappy. You let those go, you become open and receptive to the divine flow of grace. I mean, what a beautiful thing. And it's very possible to do. Back to what I was saying about, prayer. I'm not trying to minimize prayer and meditation. Of course, those things are very necessary for spiritual growth. That practice and giving yourself that time is really critical. And for me, like just to share, like I love that now, but I did not love that a couple decades ago. I wanted to love it. I would find myself being drawn into nature to seek relief before I found relief in like harmful things. And I would find it when I was trying not to utilize those harmful solutions, which I was using to disassociate. I would find it in this way also. But naturally, I was very inclined into nature and I would bring a journal and I would sit and I had this tendency to want to enter this conversation with spirit and have a deeper understanding and get some relief because I knew there was more and my soul was hungry. So I was seeking more. But eventually I blotted that out with my like false solutions that obscured light in me. And I had to go through that until that stopped working. And it became so dark that I had to make a new choice. Like I had to consent to a new path and let go of those things, which of course takes a massive amount of courage for anybody that's traveled that path of letting go of anything destructive or harmful in their life, whether it's stepping out of a dysfunctional relationship or letting go of anything toxic, just anything that's causing you pain, basically. So when I stepped onto this new path of no longer disassociating in the way that I was, I still had some kinks to work out here and there over the next like couple decades, but I started to wake up to life and I started to feel life and I started to feel very raw and everything sort of affected me. And so I had to find a way to get okay with that. And I had to do that by really getting centered so that I didn't get pulled outside of myself in so many different directions, because I'm not naturally a grounded person. I have to work very hard to be that and to come back to center. And thank goodness that's accessible and possible for everybody. Otherwise, I'd be whoosh, like out of here. And so in the beginning, it was very difficult for me to get present and sit with myself. And so that was a really big part of my spiritual path and journey, was learning how to get present with myself and addressing the things that come up when we're present. We're present for them. We're present for the things that had been suppressed and stuffed down before that actually just resulted in the depression. Pressing these things down resulted in depression and defeat. So I'm not trying to minimize that as a really important and spiritual practice, of course, because it's very important. A lot of people don't know the power of that if they haven't allowed themselves to drop into that, to be able to access insight and to be able to access all the answers and the wisdom, the things that they're needing by entering that place. So that was a gradual process. I'm still on that path, and I will be until the day that I die, hopefully. And here's the thing, there's no cap on it. And so as our awareness grows and as we become more awake, aware, and conscious, and to know ourselves, to who we are, to who God is in us, to what the divine will is for us, and how that aligns with our will, and how those two wills can really merge and become one, the need to strengthen and grow our spiritual experience also is demanded of us, really, because we are dealing with the fact that we are operating in multiple different dimensions here, multiple different planes of existence. We are human and we are spirit. And so our humanistic and material nature is always going to try and pull us back into the flesh, so to speak, whereas the soul is always going to want to grow and become bigger than that, since it is eternal and the flesh is temporary, it's finite. There's like a timeline on that, but the soul is forever. So the soul is asking to grow and is asking to reach higher and to reach beyond our humanness. But then we have to find a way to straddle the two and integrate the two and bring one into the other and live with our human limitations, and at the same time have the awareness that any limitation is simply of the mind. So the spiritual path is really about needing to continue to grow and continue to build endurance. It doesn't actually ever get easier, because the moment that you wake up to yourself and become more aware and your awareness expands and consciousness expands, then you're challenged with something else in that realm, and you're called to rise to that new degree of awareness. And when you have a new insight or understanding and a new desire of your soul or your heart that is like a lofty, like very high one that's very much in alignment with your higher self, then there's going to be challenges that are going to come to prove that, in my experience. So it's good, it's great, it's beautiful, but it doesn't get easier. It's like, oh, good grief. Like, does this ever end? Like, no, it doesn't ever end. As long as we're alive, it doesn't ever end, because the goal is divine union. And that's what the soul's wanting. It's wanting that perfect union, because that's the only thing that truly fills, truly nourishes, and truly satisfies it, is when we move out of the way and we become that which we're seeking, which we can through surrender. And we can have moments. We can have really beautiful, powerful, divine moments in life. And then those moments are interrupted by our human circumstances that are going to come up and call us to be humble, to be reliant, to help us to continue on this path, to find joy in it, to transform sadness to joy, which we do through acceptance and in gratitude, And so there's a lot of other episodes, I understand, to like break some of these concepts and things down, like joy, like gratitude, because also a lot of times people use these to like these concepts or ideas or solutions. They are solutions. Like gratitude is a really powerful, wonderful antidote and solution and high vibrational state, but they're used as like a way to bypass, because a lot of times these ideas, like they're just sort of slapped on something like in a superficial way, or an attempt to achieve them superficially, but then avoid the journey to get there. And the journey is really important, because the journey requires us to feel the whole spectrum and the whole range of it. We have to really pass through disappointment, accept it, acknowledge it. We might have to grieve. We might have to process and go through anger to get on the other side of it, to find compassion, to have true gratitude. Like that's the path through. You can't bypass, you can't avoid that. There's not really any way to go like over it or under it. It has to be experienced from beginning to end. And then you have this incredible gem of an experience that is now a part of you. So I don't know what I just talked about in this episode. Anyways, that's all I have for today, for this moment. And I love you guys. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mae B Mindful Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. For more information, resources, and exclusive content, visit our website at maybemindful.com or go ahead and follow us over on Instagram at Mae B Mindful. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please give me a follow, screenshot the episode, and go ahead and tag me until next week when I bring you another thought-provoking and inspiring topic. Until then,